The moment Karen picked up the box from my porch and held it like she'd just stolen the crown jewels, I knew she had no idea she was being watched by 3 cameras, tracked by federal agents, and about 5 minutes away from becoming the star of a sting operation. She sauntered back across the lawn, smug as ever, completely unaware that the box was wired with a die pack, GPS tracker, and had just silently triggered a silent alert to the postal inspector sitting next to me in an unmarked van. She thought she was being clever. She thought she was finally teaching me a lesson for defying HOA protocol. But she was about to find out that this time, the porch wasn't just protected by a doorbell cam. It was protected by the United States government. It started 2 weeks earlier when my 3rd package in a month disappeared from my front porch. At first, I chalked it up to bad luck, maybe even porch pirates working the neighborhood. But then my neighbor, Mr. Robinson, a retired Navy vet with a mean pair of binoculars and too much time on his hands, said he saw someone with short blonde curls and a clipboard picking up boxes like she was the mailman. And there was only one person on the block who met that description and also thought she ran the town. Karen. Karen was the self-appointed enforcer of our HOA, even though technically her term had expired last spring. No one had voted her back in. No one even wanted her there. But somehow she'd kept the keys to the clubhouse, the admin login to the HOA website, and a stranglehold on everyone's business. If your lawn was more than 2 inches, she'd write you up. If your kid left a skateboard outside for more than 10 minutes, she'd fine you. She'd once called the cops on a birthday party for having a bounce house that violated visual symmetry rules. And now, apparently, she was moonlighting as a package thief. But I couldn't just accuse her without proof. I tried installing extra cameras, but they kept mysteriously going offline, like someone was jamming them or cutting power. That's when I realized I needed help. I filed a report with the Postal Inspection Service, never really thinking it would go anywhere. To my surprise, I got a call back from a woman named Laura, who introduced herself as a federal agent specializing in mail theft. She asked if I'd be willing to assist with a sting. I said yes before she could even finish the sentence. We set the bait: a small brown box labeled training sample, explosive residue kit. It looked official, mildly dangerous, and very tempting to someone nosy enough to open it. Inside was nothing explosive, of course, but it did contain a small GPS tracker, a non-toxic die pack triggered on opening, and a motion sensor-activated camera lens embedded inside the foam. We placed it on my porch on a Thursday morning, and then we waited. Laura parked a nondescript surveillance van 3 houses down. She wore dark sunglasses and a tactical earpiece, and looked like someone who'd tackled bigger fish than Karen. I joined her in the van with a cup of coffee, heart pounding. Every car that passed made me flinch. Every dog bark felt like an alert. But by late afternoon, I started to think maybe Karen was smarter than we gave her credit for. That maybe she'd seen the label and decided to skip this one. Until 4:47 p.m. Karen didn't even try to be discreet. She walked straight across my lawn wearing her signature sun visor, HOA badge on a lanyard, and one of those canvas totes that screamed "I steal from people" and pretend it's official. She paused at the box, looked around theatrically, then scooped it up like she'd just done a favor for the entire neighborhood. She even waved at my porch camera, which I'd recently disguised inside a potted plant. That was the moment Laura clicked the timer on the tracker. Karen had taken the bait. The moment she turned the corner, Laura was already giving quiet instructions over the radio to a team stationed nearby. I just sat there stunned. Watching her walk away with that smug grin, like she was untouchable, lit a fire in my chest. I'd put up with so much from her: false fines, late-night complaints, being called suspicious for receiving tech packages, and this felt like long overdue justice. Back in the van, Laura pulled up the tracker feed. Karen had returned to her house 2 blocks away, her route exactly matching what Robinson had seen the week before. She didn't go in the front door, though. She slipped around the side and into the garage. That confirmed a theory Laura had been working on, that Karen had some kind of hidden stash zone. A place for all the things she'd collected under the radar. And with the GPS still pinging from inside, we knew it was game on. We couldn't just go barging in. Laura wanted her to open the box, which would activate the die and mark her physically. That way, when the team moved in, there would be no denial. No excuses. No, oh, I thought it was misdelivered. It had to be undeniable. Until then, the team kept a close eye, parked near the end of her block, waiting for a signal. I didn't go home that night. I stayed with a friend while the inspectors kept watch. Around 2 a.m., we got the ping. Motion in the garage. The die pack activated. The heat sensor in the box spiked, meaning it had been opened. Within minutes, Laura was on the move. The team coordinated under the radar. By the time the sun came up, Karen had blue-stained hands and an arrest warrant being served on her doorstep. The real twist wasn't just the die or the theft or even the cameras. It was what they found inside her garage. Shelves. Entire racks of boxes. Packages from all over the neighborhood. Some were unopened. Some had been stripped and sorted. And tucked in the corner, a spreadsheet taped to the wall with notes like Porch Cam Blind Spot and Collect Fridays Early. She had a whole system. That's when it hit me. Karen didn't just steal my package. She had been running a full-blown porch piracy ring disguised under the authority of the HOA. She had transformed her nosiness, entitlement, and fake authority into an actual criminal operation. And now, thanks to a single bait box, she was finally caught. As Laura wrapped up the scene and agents filed out carrying boxes of evidence, I stood on the sidewalk watching. Neighbors had gathered by then, some still in pajamas, whispering in disbelief. A few of them looked at me and nodded. One even clapped. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Karen had made my life miserable, but now she was the one being documented, processed, and carted away. And I wasn't even close to done yet, because as it turned out, the postal inspectors had a lot more to uncover. And Karen's downfall? It was just getting started. The morning after Karen's arrest, the neighborhood felt different. For the first time in years, people actually stepped outside with a sense of relief, like someone had finally opened a window in a room that had been sealed shut with judgment and fake citations. I stood by my fence, sipping coffee, watching Mrs. Penelope from across the street hang up wind chimes for the first time in a decade. She had once been fined $50 by Karen for creating musical noise pollution. Now she smiled at me like we were soldiers in the same quiet war who had finally won a battle. But the real storm was still brewing. The day wasn't even half over before the HOA's emergency meeting notice showed up in everyone's inbox. It was short and vague, probably thrown together by one of the remaining board members in a panic, but the message was clear enough. Karen's behavior had crossed a line even the board couldn't protect. I attended the meeting that evening more out of curiosity than duty. The clubhouse was packed. Residents who hadn't shown up in years were suddenly front row, many of them clutching folders or phones loaded with screenshots and receipts. I wasn't the only one who'd had enough. Sheila Torres, one of the quieter board members who'd always seemed like she was trying to avoid Karen's wrath rather than support her, stood at the front with a stiff expression. She cleared her throat, clicked a remote, and brought up a projector slide that simply read, "Unauthorized activity and pending investigation." Gasps rippled through the room. Sheila detailed how Karen had repeatedly bypassed HOA procedure, used outdated rules to enforce fines, accessed resident security footage through the neighborhood app admin portal, and worst of all, submitted reimbursement receipts for community inspections that were never approved. But the part that made the entire room shift in their seats was when Sheila read out a list of reported package thefts, including dates, descriptions, and even complaint reference numbers that had been sent to Karen directly. Some of them dismissed with generic replies like, "No evidence of wrongdoing" or "likely a misdelivery." These weren't just my packages. There were 12 others. And in nearly every case, the theft occurred within 48 hours of Karen issuing a violation notice. That revelation turned the tide. People started murmuring, some stood up with questions. It was as if the floodgates had opened. A man named Dale, who lived down on Willow Creek Drive, stood and explained how Karen had fined him 3 times for storing construction materials when he was clearly remodeling his garage. After a heated back and forth, she banned his contractors from the neighborhood under the guise of noise violations. Another resident, a young mom named Kelsey, revealed Karen had accessed her backyard camera feed without permission to monitor unsanctioned trampoline usage. As the stories poured out, it became increasingly clear that Karen's obsession with power wasn't just annoying. It was dangerous. She had blurred the line between civic responsibility and full-blown surveillance state, with herself as the unchallenged dictator of shrubbery standards and package possession. One woman even said Karen had asked her teenage son what kind of medication he received by mail and whether it was legal. Sheila ended the meeting with a formal announcement that Karen was removed from all administrative roles effective immediately. Her access to the HOA systems had been revoked, locks changed, and a temporary committee had been formed to review all recent fines, citations, and HOA fund usage from the past 2 years. The room applauded. Some people even stood. I stayed quiet, watching it all with a sense of slow-burning satisfaction. But in the back of my mind something felt unfinished. Because this wasn't just about catching a thief. This was about exposing how someone used fake authority to manipulate an entire community. After the meeting, Sheila caught up with me in the parking lot. She looked exhausted but relieved. She admitted she'd known something was wrong for a long time, but didn't know how to push back. Karen had always seemed to know just enough about everyone to make people afraid. But the arrest had broken that spell. Sheila handed me a USB drive and said, "You'll want to see this. It's from the HOA camera archives." Karen had hidden folders no one else had access to. She hesitated before adding, "There's footage of your porch from 2 weeks before this sting. And not just yours." I stayed up late that night combing through the drive. Karen had been compiling her own digital database. Dozens of videos from different homes. Multiple angles. Some of them clearly filmed through security systems she shouldn't have had access to. She wasn't just stealing packages, she was scouting them like a professional. In one video, she actually crouched behind a neighbor's hedge with binoculars and a clipboard, writing down delivery times. She labeled the file, "Tuesday window confirmed." In another, she zoomed in on a box from a medical supplier, scribbled something on a post-it, and walked off like she was inspecting a construction site. But the most chilling file was named Flagged Residents. It was a spreadsheet listing people's names, addresses, and comments like frequent deliveries, possible contraband, anti-HOA attitude, and should be watched. My name was in bold with a tag next to it. Tech shipments suspicious. Likely reselling or evading tax. That's when the weight of it all hit me. This wasn't Karen being nosy or overbearing. She had weaponized her role into a private investigation network, all unauthorized, all hidden behind a badge she made herself on Vistaprint. I handed the drive over to Laura the next day. She looked through it silently, then muttered something about needing a bigger team. Turns out the Postal Inspection Service had long suspected a local porch theft network, but they hadn't expected it to be rooted in HOA infrastructure. Laura explained how Karen's type, people who obsess over control and structure, make ideal local criminals because no one suspects them. They blend their crimes with community service and use fear and rules to cover their track. What stunned Laura the most wasn't just the videos or notes. It was the packages she'd marked for resale. Karen had created an account on a second-hand online marketplace using a fake name and was flipping items she stole. A set of headphones, prescription skincare, smart watches. Someone even recognized their own drone, still in the box. The greed wasn't even about money anymore. It was about control, pride, the thrill of being above consequence. But the moment that truly made my blood boil was a message Karen had sent to someone labeled CR. It read, Another idiot left a package on the porch. If the sting rumor is true, we'll know by tomorrow. That meant she knew. Or at least suspected. And still went through with it, either because she thought she was invincible or because she didn't care. The pieces were falling into place fast now. The HOA was doing cleanup. The postal inspectors were expanding the investigation. Neighbors were sharing their stories openly. But there was still one thing hanging in the air, one thing no one wanted to say aloud. If Karen wasn't working alone, who was CR? And just how far had this HOA pirate ring gone? Because catching Karen was satisfying. But exposing the entire web? That was the only way to make sure someone like her never rose again. And whether the next name on the list was just another pawn or the real mastermind behind it all, I was ready to find out. It didn't take long for the neighborhood to flip from quiet relief to buzzing paranoia. Karen had been arrested, yes. Her garage had been cleared out. The HOA had temporarily come under new leadership, and the community finally exhaled after years of suffocation. But now, in the space left by her downfall, a new kind of tension crept in. If she had done all this under the radar, using nothing but a laminated badge, admin access, and a big mouth, who else had helped her do it? The name, CR, haunted me. That anonymous set of initials on her message log meant there was more to this than one power-hungry woman with a porch piracy problem. It meant we'd just cut off the head of something bigger, and didn't know what was still lurking in the body. Laura wasn't taking any chances. The postal inspection team started mapping the recovery trail. All the packages, video files, and HOA communications from Karen's stolen archive were now digital evidence in a widening investigation. But there was something else happening too, something she didn't want to talk about in official briefings. More packages had been disappearing. 2 more homes reported thefts just days after Karen had been arrested. This time, the thefts were clean. No cameras triggered. No physical signs of break-in. Only the packages were gone, as if a ghost had lifted them off the porch. Which told us one very unsettling thing: someone else had learned from Karen. And they were smarter. Meanwhile, the HOA board had fallen into disarray. Sheila, who had done her best to manage things after the fallout, was now dealing with a barrage of community backlash. Not from the victims, but from a small, angry group of residents who claimed Karen had been framed and that her watchfulness kept the neighborhood safe. That alone was ridiculous enough. But then came the letter, delivered by hand to every mailbox, signed anonymously by concerned residents, and warning about outside forces manipulating the HOA for personal gain. I knew gaslighting when I saw it. Someone wanted Karen's legacy to survive. Sheila called me late one evening, exhausted and frustrated. She told me the HOA servers had been accessed remotely, files missing, admin logs wiped. Only someone with legacy access could have pulled that off. But as far as she knew, only Karen had those credentials. Unless, of course, someone else had been given access as a backup. We started combing through Karen's laptop, which had been impounded after the arrest. It was password protected and encrypted, but Laura's tech team was persistent. After nearly a week, they cracked it. And what we found inside that machine nearly made Laura drop her coffee. Karen hadn't been acting alone. She had a folder titled HOA Operations. Inside were dozens of documents with names, initials, tasks, and detailed observations of people's schedules. The document that chilled me the most was called Neighborhood Rotations. It laid out who was home when, who had deliveries most often, and who left their homes unattended during the day. It was like a predator's playbook, efficient, clinical, and terrifying. In the margin of one spreadsheet was a note in red: CR to handle Wed's sweep. There it was again. CR. Not just a contact. A co-conspirator with assigned days. Laura immediately flagged the file and initiated subpoenas on Karen's HOA communications, personal emails, and social accounts. If we could find out who CR was, we might unravel the rest of this operation. But CR had covered their tracks well. No full name. No address. Just references, vague notes, and a pattern of avoiding detection. One email had been sent to CR Mailbox 1974 at outlook.com, mailed to CR Mailbox 1974 at outlook.com. That account, we discovered, had been deleted less than an hour after Karen's arrest. Whoever CR was, they knew when to vanish. Around that same time, something strange happened. A new resident showed up to the emergency HOA planning meeting. His name was Brent Calloway. Mid-40s. Wore loafers and a pressed blue shirt with creases that hadn't bent once. Claimed he'd just moved into the neighborhood a month earlier, but no one had ever seen him unload a truck or even walk a dog. Brent stood up during the meeting and delivered a passionate speech about restoring order and respect for authority. I felt my stomach churn as he spoke. It wasn't just the words, it was the smug confidence, the coded language. He sounded just like Karen. Later that night, I checked the HOA newsletter archives. Brent Calloway's name had appeared only once, on a list of interested volunteers for HOA Task Force, submitted by none other than Karen herself 2 months earlier. There was no official record of him applying to live here, no real estate records in his name, no neighborhood welcome visit. Laura cross-referenced him against the alias accounts we found on Karen's laptop. And buried deep in the metadata of one file, a log note identified a document last edited by CR_Calloway. That was it. The match we needed. Brent Calloway was CR. But we couldn't move on him yet. Laura needed more than a name and suspicion. We needed evidence that he had actively participated in the thefts or was trying to revive the operation. So we did what worked the first time. We set another trap. This time, 3 bait packages. One on my porch, one on Dale's, one on Kelsey's, each one labeled clearly with tracking information, each wired with a new generation of tech. Tiny motion sensors, micro cameras hidden in the label, and a location ping set to activate if it left the property. We waited. 48 hours passed. Nothing. The neighborhood got quieter. Even Brent seemed to retreat, avoiding meetings, skipping walks, and keeping his windows shuttered. But on the third night, at exactly 3:12 a.m., my package moved. Laura's team had set up remote tracking, and the second the box shifted more than 2 feet, the signal lit up. It had left the porch, gone around the side fence, and disappeared into what looked like a side alley. By 3:17 a.m., it had stopped moving. By 3:19 a.m., the camera inside triggered. Someone had opened it. The footage was grainy but unmistakable. Brent Calloway, wearing latex gloves, kneeling on a plastic tarp, peering into the bait box like he was inspecting treasure. Laura got the call, and by 4 a.m., agents were at his door. He didn't even pretend to be surprised. He just stepped outside with a calmness that made the whole situation more chilling. As they cuffed him, he said, "She always said you'd set another trap. But she thought I'd be smarter." He glanced at me and added, "Looks like I wasn't." Inside Brent's home, agents found not just more packages, but detailed journals documenting surveillance routines, HOA political strategies, and even plans to infiltrate surrounding neighborhoods associations. This wasn't just about mail theft anymore. It was organized manipulation of residential control. Karen had started it, but Brent had evolved it. Where she was emotional and erratic, he was methodical and strategic. As they hauled him away, neighbors gathered in silence. No applause this time. Just quiet disbelief. Brent had fooled everyone. And worse, he had been handed the keys by Karen months before. Their operation had nearly taken root again. But now the evidence was irrefutable. Karen may have been the storm, but Brent was the architect. And now both were out. But there was one final document found in Brent's files that none of us were ready for. A simple list. 20 names. 20 neighborhoods. All with marks next to them. Stage 2. Pending. Karen and Brent weren't just tormenting one HOA. They were testing a model for control. And if we hadn't stopped them, They might have turned suburban communities across the county into their own personal playgrounds. We had won the battle, but we weren't sure how big the war had grown. The courtroom buzzed with a mix of curiosity, anxiety, and a kind of quiet anticipation that only comes when the spectacle involves someone everyone knows too well. Karen was back, but not as the enforcer of made-up HOA codes. She was the defendant in a federal case, and the irony of her standing in a place where actual rules mattered more than her neighborhood interpretations wasn't lost on anyone in the room. She sat with the same stiff posture she always used in board meetings, hands clasped as if she was still in control. But this time there was no clipboard, no badge, no power. Just a thick file of evidence, a public defender who looked like he regretted waking up that morning, and a courtroom filled with neighbors who were finally watching justice unfold. It didn't take long for the prosecutors to lay out the opening volley. The assistant U.S. attorney presented a clear, clinical timeline. 3 months of orchestrated package theft, unauthorized surveillance, accessing private camera systems through illegally retained HOA administrator credentials, tampering with mail, impersonating authority, and using her position to manipulate residents. When they showed the porch footage of her taking the bait box, smiling at the hidden camera, there was a collective exhale from the gallery. No one had imagined the woman who once wrote up a child for improper use of sidewalk chalk would end up with federal charges, but there she was, caught in high-definition video, hoisting stolen mail like a trophy. Karen's defense was exactly what everyone expected, and yet somehow more ridiculous than anticipated. She insisted she had taken the package as part of her unofficial neighborhood inspection, and that she had concerns about potential hazardous contents. She claimed she was performing a civic duty that no one else in the HOA had stepped up to maintain the integrity of the community, and that she had acted to prevent possible terrorism. The courtroom remained silent, though one juror visibly rolled their eyes. It got worse. She claimed that the postal inspectors had set her up. That Ryan, me, the person who filed the original report, had personal grudges and manipulated the system to frame her. Her defense attorney looked visibly uncomfortable when she began reading from handwritten notes, quoting HOA bylaws that had nothing to do with federal law. At one point, she even requested a brief recess because she needed to update the HOA newsletter with a public correction. The judge stared at her for a solid 5 seconds before denying the motion. When it was my turn to testify, I walked up to the witness box with a mix of nerves and quiet resolve. I explained everything: the missing packages, the sting operation, how Laura and her team from the Postal Inspection Service had worked with me to catch Karen red-handed. I told the court about the garage full of stolen goods, the files hidden in her laptop, and the spreadsheet that mapped out delivery patterns for over 24 homes. I kept it factual, clear, and direct. When I mentioned the file named Flagged Residents, Karen interrupted, loudly objecting, even though she wasn't a lawyer. The judge warned her once. When she did it again, she was held in contempt and removed from the courtroom for the rest of my testimony. Once she was escorted out, Laura took the stand. Calm, methodical, and armed with years of investigative experience, she dismantled Karen's story with absolute precision. She explained the tracker tech, the dye packs, the hidden cameras, and the legal protocols followed. She laid out the chain of evidence like puzzle pieces sliding perfectly into place. There was no room left for doubt. Karen had orchestrated everything and done it under the fake veil of neighborhood order. Then came the surprise. A new witness, Karen's own nephew Cole, who had lived with her briefly 2 years prior and had access to some of her tech and routines. He took the stand and hesitated at first, but once he started talking, he didn't stop. He told the court about how Karen had created dummy email accounts, used burner phones, and set up her own resale profiles to flip stolen goods. He had helped her set up cameras. He didn't know what they were for at first, but by the time he figured it out, she threatened to report him for theft if he ever said anything. His testimony shattered any remaining doubts about whether Karen knew what she was doing. The prosecution rested. And that's when Karen pulled the most unhinged move of the trial. She fired her public defender in open court, requested to represent herself, and launched into a rambling monologue about how the HOA was under attack by untrustworthy influences. She brought up old disputes about holiday decorations, illegal basketball hoops, and someone's bird feeder being too colorful. The judge allowed it for about 5 minutes before cutting her off and resuming with closing argument. It was all over faster than anyone expected. The jury deliberated for just under 2 hours. They returned with a verdict, guilty on all counts. Karen sat frozen, blinking slowly, like the reality hadn't registered. The judge began reading the sentencing recommendations, citing not just the thefts but the calculated manipulation of authority, the abuse of neighborly trust, and the lasting psychological impact on residents. When she was finally led away in handcuffs, Karen looked over her shoulder at the gallery and muttered, "You'll miss me when I'm gone." No one replied. The silence was louder than any words. But the court day wasn't done. Brent Calloway's hearing was scheduled right after. His demeanor was the opposite of Karen's, quiet, composed, unshaken. He pled guilty immediately, hoping for a reduced sentence. But the prosecutors weren't offering leniency. Brent had taken Karen's tactics and refined them. His digital footprint showed an intention to spread this HOA manipulation model beyond our neighborhood, even attempting to contact individuals in other states with similar power vacuums. He was methodical, and that made him more dangerous than Karen ever was. Evidence was presented of his direct involvement in multiple package thefts after Karen's arrest. He had learned from her mistakes, avoided cameras, and targeted homes where he believed victims wouldn't speak up. The bait package sealed his fate. The footage was reviewed by the judge, and Brent didn't even flinch. When asked if he had anything to say, he simply said, "It was efficient." Until it wasn't. Both were sentenced the same week. Karen received 5 years with the possibility of parole after 3, plus mandatory psychological counseling. Brent got 6 years, no parole due to the premeditated nature of his crimes and the digital surveillance plan targeting other communities. The court also ordered restitution to the affected residents, though most knew they'd never see a dime. What mattered more was that the courtroom had delivered something Karen never could: real justice. After the trial, Sheila and the HOA board held a community meeting to explain what came next. A full audit of HOA policies was underway. Every past citation, fine, and complaint was under review. Karen's personal files were being used to reverse wrongful charges and issue refunds. More importantly, new security measures were being voted on, and for the first time, the community was actually excited to participate. But as we left the meeting that night, one of the younger board members handed me an envelope. Inside was a simple printed email log, recovered from Brent's files. It showed an outgoing message to an anonymous address, dated 1 day before his arrest. It read, "Still active cells. Delay stage 2. We'll regroup." It didn't name anyone, didn't list locations, but it was enough to send a chill down my spine. Brent and Karen were caught, yes, but the idea behind what they did, the belief that fear and control could be masked as community service, was still alive somewhere. And someone, somewhere, was still reading those emails. Weeks passed after the trial, but the shadows Karen and Brent left behind didn't vanish overnight. The neighborhood was quieter, more cautious, like a town recovering from a storm that had torn through without warning. People were friendlier, but you could see it in their eyes. They were still watching over their shoulders. Packages still arrived, of course, but now everyone had installed cameras, sensor lights, or even hired professional security installers. The HOA, stripped down and restructured, was working overtime to rebuild trust. Sheila, who had stepped up during the chaos, was now elected HOA president in an official vote. For the first time, it was a clean, transparent process with every homeowner invited and heard. But beneath the surface of healing, something still felt unsettled. I received a letter in the mail one morning. No return address, plain envelope, typed text. It said, "Order may be restored, but surveillance never sleeps. Phase 2 begins where you least expect it." At first, I thought it was a prank, maybe from one of the last Karen loyalists trying to stir fear. But when I showed it to Laura, she didn't laugh. She didn't even blink. She looked at it like she'd seen something similar before. Then she admitted quietly, "You're not the only one who got this." Over the course of a few days, 6 other residents received the same message. Same font, same formatting, same cryptic warning. It didn't name anyone. It didn't demand anything. But it reminded all of us that Brent's operation hadn't been just some rogue hobby. It had structure, intent, a vision that extended beyond Karen's petty obsession with lawn length and trampoline permit. It was about control, camouflaged under HOA rulebooks and community language, and whoever was still out there hadn't given up on it. The authorities reactivated a limited watch on the area. Postal inspectors remained in contact, and federal agents kept tabs on any online chatter resembling Karen's old method of communication. Meanwhile, the HOA initiated mandatory system overhauls. Every password was changed. Every admin account re-verified. All surveillance records now required documented approval, and every decision had to pass through a vote. It was a new era. But as much as we wanted it to feel like a clean slate, the truth was that you can't scrub away every stain. I threw myself into helping residents restore what Karen had taken, emotionally and materially. I helped Sheila audit old fine records, overturning citations that were clearly vendettas in disguise. A father who'd been fined 3 times for leaving a tricycle on the porch had his charges wiped and even received a reimbursement from a new HOA fund. A veteran who'd been harassed over the position of his flagpole was issued an apology, written and signed by every member of the new board. The HOA clubhouse, once locked down like Karen's private fortress, was now open for community events. A barbecue was scheduled to celebrate the reopening of the neighborhood. At that barbecue, something remarkable happened. A young couple who had almost moved out due to Karen's harassment stood in front of the entire gathering and shared how they'd canceled their sale. They had hope again because the community had proved it could change. That moment hit hard. Because even through all the chaos, trials, and surveillance revelations, what mattered most was the simple fact that people still wanted to live together. Not just exist next to each other, but actually live, trust, connect. As the community healed, one final piece of the puzzle remained unresolved: the origin of the Phase 2 list found in Brent's possession. Laura and her team worked tirelessly to trace the digital trail. And finally, a break came through a data recovery from Brent's old burner phone. An encrypted file decrypted into an organized spreadsheet of potential HOA target neighborhoods, addresses, even notes on weak leadership, past HOA conflicts, and community vulnerabilities. It was a recruitment roadmap. The document was labeled Expansion Model, Suburban Authority Structures. Brent hadn't been freelancing. He had a blueprint. Karen had been his prototype, and we were his test lab. Federal authorities moved quickly. They issued quiet advisories to HOAs across 3 states. Several names on the list were cross-checked with known suspicious HOA incidents: misuse of authority, unrecorded fines, missing HOA funds. It turned out that Karen and Brent's ideology wasn't new. It was just bolder. A calculated plan to infiltrate local power structures disguised as neighborhood improvement. But for all the seriousness, life didn't stop moving. Kids played in the street again. Porch decorations returned. Neighbors lingered on sidewalks longer, waving, talking, laughing. We had pulled back the curtain, faced the darkness, and decided to rebuild something better. But we weren't naive anymore. We knew how easily authority could be hijacked. And we knew how dangerous it was to ignore the little things. The fake citations, the petty rules, the people who weaponize paperwork. I installed one final upgrade to my home security system. Not just cameras, but a live feed backup connected to a private cloud with real-time alerts sent to me, my lawyer, and, just in case, Laura. Paranoia? Maybe. But after what we had just been through, vigilance wasn't just smart. It was necessary. One morning, as I was testing the system, I saw a new car pull into the driveway of the house Karen once lived in. A woman stepped out, mid-30s, stylish, confident, clipboard in hand. She glanced at the lawn, made a note, then looked up at the house like she was assessing a battlefield. Something about her looked familiar. Not her face, but her posture. That eerie calmness. She smiled at the mail carrier walking by and introduced herself. "Hi, I'm Melissa. I'm forming a new HOA compliance committee. Just moved in." My stomach dropped. Later that week, a flyer appeared on every door. Reclaiming neighborhood standards, Melissa H. invites all residents to an HOA restoration night. Let's bring back order together. She had used the same layout Karen once used. Even the font matched. I kept the flyer. Showed it to Sheila. She looked at it, then looked at me. Neither of us said a word. But we both knew. This wasn't over. Karen had fallen. Brent had followed. But the structure they tried to build, it was still tempting to people like Melissa. People who believed they were saviors, even while eroding trust behind the scenes. I filed a quiet report with Laura. Just a heads up. No accusations. Just a simple, careful observation. Because we weren't going to be caught off guard again. Not here. Not ever. That night, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, I thought about the neighborhood before all of this. The fake peace. The false order. And then I thought about now, the real peace, fragile but honest. We had fought back. Exposed corruption hiding in plain sight. Reclaimed our space from people who mistook power for purpose. And now we knew better. The package Karen took off my porch that day wasn't just a box. It was a turning point. A trap, yes, but not just for her. For all the quiet control freaks, the entitled power seekers, the self-made tyrants hiding behind HOA policy and paper fines. That box cracked the door open. And what we found behind it, it changed everything. The porch was never just a porch. It was the front line. And now, finally, it was ours again.